chance to see some results before it's finalized and published,
yeah,
so
right.
that's good.
All right.
Okay.
And you?
Where do you want me to start?
Wherever.
So the subject of our interview is what now?
Training the young.
Training the
So
young.
education as well as like informal socialization of children. How
Okay.
children learn how to act and how not to act, and important lessons is what we want to focus on in our chapter.
Well, let me just start, and then you all interrupt at any time, and then you ask me questions, because I've not naturally prepared anything to give to you or to follow an outline. Let me just start by saying I think it starts with a home, okay? And if we're talking about training or educating the young, it must start there. Some of the conditions in the home warrant other additional help in those early years. I started out in a home with a mother and a father, like most people do, and then things happened, and my father was left with 3 children, and he raised 3 of us. My brother was 1. I was a little bit more than 2, and my sister was 4. So I think that a key part of what makes learning possible, and to the extent that it should be, has to start early. Some adult or adults must play a major role in making sure that certain things happen beyond the normal taking care of kids position. And so we can talk more about that with your questions to me, but that's where it needs to start. And then and we go to the school aspect of it. I think that as parents, they have a responsibility to know where they are sending their children. And so I'm speaking now about parenting and training and looking for the best. All schools can be the best if certain factors are there. And it just so happened that when I went to school, I went to a school that was called Garfield Elementary School. And in those days, it was a school where many of the families that had position and other kinds of things going for them had their children enrolled. For example, the people that I mentioned earlier that's not on tape, that happens to own this building and the plant, their daughter Linda and I were classmates. So that speaks to the other families who were there. I was not in that category as a student, but because I was around a number of other students who had the kinds of support, it made it possible for me to learn from them and to be able to compete with them and to have experiences through some of their experiences as we shared and as we did other things. So I think it's important that the parental involvement stays hooked when the student starts to school, and then that you find that the school is offering a wide range of opportunities. It so happened that the school that I attended had options for students, from being on patrol, where I was allowed to work my way up to being captain of patrol, which means that you gradually get some leadership opportunities, stop at any time. And then from plays that they would practice and produce at a local church. Our school was next to a park, so we had the park possibilities, and then I think it boils down to the teachers that you have that are in a school. It just so happened, if I may continue to use that as an example, that we had teachers who were dedicated, as is 99% of the teachers in schools today. But we didn't have some of the frustrations that teachers had to deal with that they're facing today, which keeps them from being focused. So I had a teacher that turned me on to thinking that learning was fun and important. His name was Mr. Roland J. Dygert, and I had him for 2.5 years. And that causes me to believe that another important thing about students and learning and training of students is for them to have adults around them that they get to know, and the adults get to know them, and they become comfortable with the learning environment. And I learned so many things from him. My first goal of what I wanted to be came from Mr. Dygert. He was a pilot in World War II, and he flew several missions, and we always wanted to hear about flying, and that's what caused me to become interested in reading about airplanes and building model airplanes and spending my extra money on little gasoline engines and those kinds of things. So students need to be around people that they can gain things from in a way that's not being taught. You know, they need to have some experiences, some qualities that will lead to becoming excited about learning. And the other thing that needs to happen when we're talking about training the young is they need to be motivated and almost forced, if you will, to do extra things. And the schools that provide those opportunities and find a way to say to families, and I don't speak about mother and father, I call them caregivers, because so often it's not the mother and father. More than ever now it's the grandparents, or maybe an uncle and aunt, or maybe a single parent. And they need the opportunity to have someone pushing them to do things. If I could credit one thing to my success beyond what the Lord has provided for me, if you take that as a given, everything I owe to Him, everything has been made possible through Him. My father could have given us to his parents, and they could have raised us, but he didn't, so it started with those kinds of blessings. But when you look at the opportunities to fail, students need opportunities to be pushed out there. We were talking about Natalie, and Natalie is not quite where we wanted to be with that strength of it's okay if you don't succeed, okay, and somehow they need to learn that you compete and you lose and you grow and you compete and you keep getting better and better, and eventually you will be able to have your fair share of successes. And that's what's happening in schools, where the focus is on learning and not just on results, but growth individually for students. I've seen through the years, I spent most of my educational career here in the Muncie schools. I started teaching here when I was just out of college. I didn't think I was going to get a job here, because in those days they were not hiring people of color in schools except one in Muncie. That was in 1960. And because of that factor, I was told that I would not be employed, because at that time all the African-American teachers were in one building, and the building principal there said he'd love to have me. I'd done my student teaching there and all that, but it's time for some other schools to accept teachers of color. 2 weeks before the start of school, there was a transfer, and I was allowed to start at Longfellow Elementary School as a teacher. And spent 34, almost 35 years in Muncie schools. When I go back and look at the opportunities that students have and the kinds of things that must happen if we're going to work on the training, the Muncie school system has been one that's continued to get better, not because of me, but because of previous leaders and mainly because of the teachers that are, and the other staff members. We developed during my tenure as superintendent a philosophy that everyone is important that works in the schools, and that no one person in any position is more important than any other person. The only differences we have are in our positions and responsibilities and our pay. But everything else is just as important. And we tried to develop an atmosphere where there was a team understanding and a team approach. And I think that that's another factor that's real important if we're going to get the best in the way of training for and learning for our students. I've tried to ask adults in the lives of children to model that. opportunity. There are things that I think that adults should do at their own expense and sacrifice just to teach the children in their lives that something is important. An example would be that I think that adults should model reading. That's very, very key. I think that reading is the most important skill that students must learn. And I was fortunate in that when I went to school, Garfield School was located next to the Marion Hunt Library, okay? We didn't have books in my home. However, we had the latest magazines. Our magazines were usually, at the most, a month old. My father worked at a place where they had told him that he could take the magazines home when new ones came in. So we had National Geographics, we had Look, Life, Reader's Digest, Time magazine. We had all of the magazines. We had some magazines on popular mechanics, and all those things were in the home where I grew up, and they were a month old, but to us they were just like brand new. Okay, and so we look forward to them. I look forward to reading the jokes in Reader's Digest or the cartoons in Look magazine. But it helped me to become a reader. But the main thing that helped me was being able to go to the library about every other day and check out anything from the old big Viewmasters to books that I would want to read. And I think that that's another key factor, is just getting students to the point that they enjoy reading. We have 3 children. Our oldest child is almost 5 years older than the other 2. And we thought at once we were going to have one. But our oldest child was spoiled from day one, and quite frankly, we learned from that. The second 2, we learned how to have more control, and I think that that's a part that's important. We forced some things on all 3 of them, and I think that's a part of what needs to happen with parents and this reading situation. I don't think the children just come here enjoying reading. They have to be encouraged, and you have to provide opportunities for them. Unlike in the days when I grew up, when we didn't have TV and we didn't have a car and we didn't have some other things, you were stuck at home, and you had to find things to do. And for me, reading just came naturally because it was something fun to do. But today, with video games and TV and other kinds of things and activities in your church and all that for young people, there's a lot of competition for time. But when a youngster gets to the point that they will pick up a book and read on their own, or they carry a book with them and they're reading, or they enjoy coming home and knowing that they have to get their homework done first, then that's when they become a student. And I think that the home and the school and the church and relatives and siblings should all work together to help young people at an early age become a student. There's something else that's happening that we didn't understand in the old days, and that's the research on learning. I think it's real important that people like yourself, who's going to be a teacher, and anyone who's going to work with children, have a thorough understanding of the research. The research basically says that young people have all of what they need, or could have all of what they need, before they enter our public schools. And that's kind of frightening to think that students should come to school reading, counting, writing, all those things, because we don't normally tend to think that they can do that. But the research on the brain development is that after about 3.5 years of age, the brain can be fully developed, but just would mature from that point on. And that they can have over 50% of the language that they're going to need for the rest of their life. And when you think about those things, and you look at the number of students who come who can't count, don't know their colors, don't know their alphabet, can't read, they're starting off in a position where they've missed the important years of their development. And that's what makes the work for the public schools in particular so difficult when that's happened. Quite frankly, with my wife and I raising children, we didn't do that, okay? Our children didn't get that start. We didn't even think that they should read before they went to school. Here I am, Ball State graduate, and all that teaching in school, and I didn't even have that expectation for our own children. But that's really important today for all families to understand that that's possible. And there's certain things that need to happen early on for it to be a reality. And that's going to be the biggest frustration for public schools as more and more demands are placed on them and more requirements are there in the way of showing proof of achievement, and yet the students are coming with such a deficit in their learning, and the learning curve has not been what it should be, that it's going to make it difficult. I want to stop here and give you a chance to ask me a few questions about what I've shared before I move into another area that I believe in, that there's certain things that should be required for students who are going to, if we're going to end up with students who in fact can fit into society and be a contributor as well as taking care of their own needs, their own families.
Go right ahead.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
You've talked about how important family and the home are to education. With your father raising your family by himself, how was he able, like while he was working and juggling everything, to take an active part in your education, like to come to the school very frequently or to work with you very much at home?
No, he wasn't. My father, besides being a single parent, had, just before he was left with us, he had been in a horrible automobile accident.
Oh, wow.
And he was left on the road, and finally someone came along in a truck and picked him up and took him into the nearest town in Mississippi, happened to be Greenwood, where he was treated. What they did was they cleaned him up, and they wrapped him up, and they took his right hand, and they didn't figure they could do anything, so they just cut this part off like this, and they wrapped it up. They sent him back to the plantation the next day. Okay, so my father, like most people who lived on a plantation, was a person that picked cotton. Well, you can't pick cotton with a hand that's like that. So if you can't work, you can't stay on the plantation. Okay, so skipping a lot of things, getting to your question, when my father came here during World War II, he was not able to get a job. Okay. So the war was going on. His brothers, his uncles, even his father, who was almost 70, was hired in the plant during the war.
And God,
okay.
He wasn't.
Okay. My father was not. My father eventually got a job as a custodian at the Indiana Bridge Company. And he worked there. He had to be there at 6 o'clock. And where we lived, there wasn't bus service at 6 o'clock. The bus service before 6 o'clock to get into work, so he walked to work, didn't have a car. And that meant he had to walk home. And when he'd get home, because where he worked, they didn't pay very much. And I won't go into that. I'm doing some writing myself. You'll get a chance to read that in more detail. But the bottom line is that he had to have other jobs in order to make enough money for us to live. So he was working most of the time. Every day there was something else to do, whether it was we were cutting grass, and he'd have to walk from where I lived over on where Madison Street is, and second over and where the Muncie Housing Authority office is. I lived over near the Muncie Housing Authority, 1 block away from where the housing authority started on 2nd Street. And he would walk from there over here on Wheeling, close to where the Burger King is.
Oh, God.
Okay, and we cut grass right there at the place that looks like it was a mortuary at one point. Now it's a business there. There's a dentist's office there just before you get to where the fast food rows start. Okay, and so when you look at his schedule, he didn't always have time. But what he did do was to make sure we got back to all the activities. We could go back to all the things at the school. When he got a car, he would pick up other kids and take them, because there were a number of people who were our friends that lived in the projects that they didn't have cars, and so he did a super job considering his work schedule, and he made sure we knew that he thought school was important. And so as far as coming over and visiting and sitting in on classrooms and being a room father and all that, no, but there weren't any other people doing it either. And so he was a very unusual man, okay, to do all that he did. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
He did as well as a person could do. I was in a workshop this morning with Dr. Stroud. I don't know if you know him, but he's a person at Ball State that does a lot of things with fathering responsibilities and all that. And we're trying to figure out how, with our CAPE program that we operate, how can we get more fathers involved in the lives of their children. And it's difficult because there's so many family situations where the father is not there, but there may be a grandfather or there may be a significant other that lives there that's male. But trying to get that involvement. You said you had 2 questions.
Oh yeah. When did you move up to Muncie? How old were you?
I was 4 years old when I came to Muncie. We had moved from a little town called Muncie, Mississippi, to Greenwood, Mississippi. And my father spent some time working in a restaurant, trying to wash dishes and help cook, and couldn't make a living that way. Okay, we came to Muncie, and we spent 2 years living with his sister and brother-in-law. Because when you come to a new town and you don't have money and you don't have a job, you move in with someone that's a relative, and that's what happened with a lot of families back in those days. So I was 4 years old.
So you started all your schooling in Muncie then?
All my schooling in Muncie. Started at Blaine Elementary School. Blaine is now has been demolished. Okay, but I was there.
Yeah, okay. Because I was like, that name sounds familiar. I think the Wilsons, their family was raised, or she was raised in Blaine?
Yes, she was.
Okay, she was raised in Blaine, okay.
I went to Blaine for a year and a half, started out kindergarten there, and my favorite thing at Blaine was chocolate milk and graham crackers. Okay? The rest of it didn't count, but that was my favorite thing to look forward to. And my father was able to purchase a home, and we moved to 811 East 2nd Street, and I transferred to Garfield School, and that's where I started really getting some opportunities to understand how fun learning could be. Yeah, I'm sure it was just as fun at Blaine. It's just that I didn't, being new in a community and having been raised thus far in a state and an area of the state where you didn't have any opportunities at all. It was just an adjustment for us to make. And my older sister was always a good student. I think that's a factor in life. If there is a role model in your family, my sister read a lot, okay, and she was a good student. In fact, I always remember when I was at Wilson, an English teacher, Mrs. St. John, Miss St. John, said to me when she pulled me out in the hall, she said, "Sam, you know better than to chew gum in here. You weren't allowed to chew gum. I was chewing gum. And you know better than to chew gum in here. You need to be a student like your sister." Well, my sister would never have been caught chewing gum in class. Okay. But I share that just to say that it's wonderful when you have an older sibling that's doing well in school. It helps reputations help. It shouldn't be a factor if it's a negative reputation, but it is. If my sister had been a student that had lots of problems, they would have already had me tagged to have some. But she was a good student, and they had me tagged that I should be one too. And those things are important.
Yeah, I have two sisters, and I'm the middle child as well. And so my sister, she was not a bad child, but she was always into doing something at the wrong time. So, and I always get caught by it. So she had not so bad type reputation, but it wasn't the best. So of course I had to come from up under that, and I had to make I hated it. Well, you should be like your sister, or your sister wouldn't do that, or had to make my own. So I made the positive, view in our high school, and then my younger sister came through, and they really didn't make the connection as Kara, because her older sister's name is Kara. She was gone, and for a while before Carmen came in, but. Once Carmen came in, then it was like, well, you should be like your sister Carla. She hated that too. So sometimes it was good, but you had to make your own kind of reputation, because being up under that for so long, especially not even in the school system, but just with even the family,
Yes.
It's like but that's fine. So, gotta get by with things.
Yes. Well, maybe if I could just use a little bit more of what happened to me and how that helped me, it might be, and again, help me with anything you need. One of the things that happened to me was that when I was in junior high school in those days, I had a math teacher, Mr. McKeever, that I had him for algebra, and he thought that I was a good student. I wanted to work hard because he kept telling me that I was a good student, and so I was able to do well in his class, and he would share that with other people. When I moved on into high school, I continued to do what I thought was right, but I made a change based on an interest inventory that said that I would be good in auto mechanics because I had an interest in cars, and I did have. So I spent 2 years at the trade school, and that took me off track. And I share that to say that at one point I had a shrewd awakening that I'm not getting some things I should get, and I transferred back to the high school full-time my senior year. But it was a little late. I missed some things that I wish I had had an opportunity to have experience. So I decided then that if I was ever married and ever had any children, then our children wouldn't make that mistake. There's another thing that I did that I would say that is important for families and for students not to do. And sometimes sharing what doesn't work is as important as sharing what does work. I started working when I was young. I've shared this with the other group, and they think it's important here. I started selling the newspaper downtown when I was in the 4th grade. So I'd come down from school, and I wouldn't allow our children to ever do this, to leave school and walk downtown, crossing railroad tracks, and going down there and getting papers and walking the street, selling papers, and then walking back home, stopping in the store, buying things on the way home. I wouldn't allow that. It was a different time then. But then I moved from that to shining shoes, and I got used to working. I participated in athletics in junior high school, and I started out participating in high school. And I was on the track team. And Mr. Mel Wilson, the track coach, was pleased with how I was coming. I was not a star. I was never going to be a star. And that's not the important part about participating. But I quit. And he's the only person that's made a contact with my home to the only teacher during my whole time in school that made a contact with the home to try to convince my father that I should stay on the team. And my father, because he trusted my judgment, said, well, it's up to him. If he doesn't want to, it's all right. Well, that's another mistake I made. Okay, I think that in order for students to be able to be a good student, they must be involved in extracurricular activities. We insisted that our 3 children had to be. Tell me where else you'd like to go. I haven't talked with you any more about myself, but
structure and discipline. We've been having a few interviews, and things that they feel that's important in our Muncie's family when dealing with the education, in family involvement in the education. They mentioned a lot about discipline and structure being very important. Do you agree, and how do you feel about that?
I definitely agree. There's a concept that I believe in called engaged time on task. Some people say time on task. There's some others of us to believe in engaged time on task. The actual amount of time that's locked into the plan instruction for whatever period of time that's being used. One of the things that perhaps made for so many success stories from the Garfield days, most of the people in the class that I was in, most of them have had some wonderful opportunities because we didn't have discipline problems in that classroom. Okay? We didn't have any. We knew what was expected of us both at home and at school, and that has to be a match. And once you have that match, then you don't have wasted time and energy. And the challenge today is we don't always have that match. And the other thing that deals with discipline is it needs to be a progressive disciplinary approach to dealing with things. That means that people in the lives of young people need to know how to discipline young people. When I was teaching, I used to hear things that were impossible. I'll kill you if you do that again, okay? Or you're going to be in the doghouse for 2 months. Disciplining young people requires sacrifices from the adults in their lives. And the challenge today is that many adults don't really want to make that sacrifice. They might say, well, you go to your room. Don't come out for half an hour. So they go to the room, they turn the TV on, and they do some other things. And it really didn't cost them anything. They just changed one environment to an environment that really is not too bad. Okay, you go in your room, you got everything in there, you close your door, and you just do what you want to do, and your time's up, you come out, and you really haven't lost anything. I think that it's real important that discipline be something that is clear and understood, and that it's consistent, and that everyone understands the things are going to happen and the progression of what's going to happen. One of the things that's happening in schools is this whole area of counseling. My master's work was done in guidance and counseling. I was a counselor in heart and everything else before I was a building principal. And I think that the counseling that should occur early, yet we still have schools throughout our country where the elementary schools do not have counselors or enough of the counseling time from a counselor. And it doesn't occur until they get into what we call middle school in most places. I think that's wrong. I think that we need counselors in all of our schools who can build a counseling team that can't be just the counselor. It has to branch out to where the total building is a part of that counseling team. And the counselor spends part of his or her time teaching the other staff members how to do what he or she does. And they coordinate that. One of the things on discipline is that it needs to be approached early, and the proper referrals need to be made. And as I've traveled around in various places to either be a part of a North Central evaluation team or to chair the teams as a leader of the evaluation process. I still find too many situations where schools don't know how to make referrals. They're still trying to deal with it, and they don't know that when I get to this point, we should be referring this out for additional help from a list of resources that we've already thought through. So I think it's a key factor. We have children coming into our public schools with major challenges because of the thing that I spoke about earlier that should be happening before they get there. Children should come to school already able to sit still with, somewhat of an attention span. But many of them come not able to do that. And there's some conditions that sometimes causes students to be mislabeled as maybe special ed when really it's all about things have happened that's really in this area of discipline. It just so happened that I had a mentor that told me when I was working for him that you should identify the areas of your weakness. And if you're going to go back to school, concentrate on making those your strong points. When I went back for my doctoral work, reading was a weakness. It started out when I was teaching. I didn't know how to teach reading very well.
Okay.
The supervisor of language arts came in and helped me teach reading for 2 weeks. 2 weeks she spent in my room helping me as a new teacher know how to group those kids and teach the groups and follow through with reading. And it helped to make me a much better teacher. I said if I ever became a superintendent, I wanted to be able to make sure that any system where I was the superintendent, we made reading one of the major focal points. So a part of my doctoral work was in reading. In fact, I had one of my chairpersons say, why are you concentrating so hard on reading? You're going to be a superintendent. You're not going to teach reading. And you're taking these reading classes. You have to take the tests at the end of the class to proficiency and the skills. And why are you doing that? I said, because I want to know just a little bit more than I do now about how reading should be taught and make sure it's done properly. The other thing that I didn't know much about was special ed. When I was a building principal, I was the only principal that had a special ed class in their building. There was another building where all the other special ed kids went to. Okay, I had one in the building, but it was in the basement, and it was separated from all the other things that we did. They were just housed there. Okay, that was what happened. I didn't think too much about trying to say we ought to integrate them more into what we're doing, and I didn't fight it because I didn't know any better. That was wrong. Okay, I did my dissertation in special ed. Okay, and doing that, I learned a lot about special ed structures and selection of students and all those things, and that's what makes me, I think, able to say that some of the students that may get labeled as special ed really aren't special ed. They just have not learned how to behave, and they don't have the kinds of skills and the kinds of social whatevers that allows them to fit into a school environment and start becoming a student at a faster rate. I'm going to stop again so you can ask me things. Okay? My answer to that is that I think that discipline is real important.
Oh,
it's a part of the structure that should be there and should be nourished by the total team.
I have a question on mine, but I gotta frame it first. Let me frame it, and then I'll get back with you.
Well, just relax. Don't worry about how you frame it.
Oh gosh, how was I was just thinking, like making a list. From like 1 to whatever number of things that it takes to, without getting off track, because I'm taking what you're saying and I'm going to use it, but to run a school with to keep the kids focused, like, okay, you were saying like education, involvement, discipline, parents helping or parents teaching their children things they should know way beforehand. Listing things like that in order. What would you put first? What order, would they? Do you understand what I'm trying to go? What kind of?
I think I do. So you help me. If I don't, you keep asking.
Okay.
Yeah, that's important to do. Let me go back to what I think is important. It still is the home or the environment before a child gets to school.
Okay.
I don't like to use personal examples, but perhaps the best way to do that is to refer to the blessing that I've received. Okay. I've learned from my mistakes. Okay. And as parents, we have to. We had a structure with our children. We had family meetings. Okay. And a part of the family meeting gave everyone a chance to discuss things. And if you meet our middle daughter, you can tell right away when she's upset. And she knows I say this because she would start taking in air. And pretty soon she was just really popped up. And then I could know right away she's upset. And I would say, Judy, breathe, let the air out. And one day she let the air out and she told me, you don't know how to be a parent. Because they had a chance to say whatever they want to say in the family meeting. We want you to say what you feel, what you think. And that's what she told me. And so I had her come over and I said, come here. And I hugged her real tight and I whispered in her ear, you're right. I don't know how to be a good parent. I'm still learning. I'll be learning past the time that you're gone, and I still won't be good at it without a lot of help from you. And so I think that going back to my earlier statement, I'd put that as number one, that there are a number of things. If we want to talk about training and learning, we can't forget those first few years. Most children do not go to school until they get to kindergarten. I wished our children had had the chance that this young guy's getting. Okay, he goes to school. It's a little expensive. My wife and I subsidize it. Okay, but he goes to a school, not a nursery. Okay, and they teach him every day.
How is that a current picture or?
That he's not 2 yet. Okay, they've just had their second child. He'll be 2 April the 7th. Okay, but he goes to school where they teach him, so he can sing all the nursery rhymes and he can say his ABCs and he can count, and he's learning to count in Spanish, and they're teaching him something every day. Okay, and he knows the routine. He knows how when they drop him off, he can walk down that hall, he can go to his classroom, and he can pull his chair out, and he can sit in his chair, and he can get things out to do. Okay, he knows how to do that. And I think another key thing that fits within the list you've given me is, I was trying to say that they must become students. I was trying to say that. I didn't know that when I taught. When I taught the old-fashioned way. I'd stand at the door. They had to come past me. When they wanted to go to the restroom, I'd line them up, and I'd take them down the hall. I'd wait for them to come out of the restrooms and line back up, and I'd take them back to the room. And then finally I had a principalship change, and the principal told me, he said, you're not having any fun. So he came down and he taught for me. Mr. Gilbert Bushy taught, and the kids liked it so well, I felt badly that they liked him, and they'd say, well, when's Mr. Bushy coming back? And when he met with me and reviewed how I was teaching, and he said, it's okay, loosen up, have some fun. He said, turn them loose a little bit more. And my last 3 years of teaching, I had expectations for students so that I didn't have to be at the door. They could come in, they knew what they were supposed to do. I didn't feel like I had to be in there to get them started, okay? And when they wanted to go to the restroom, they just get the pass and they go, okay? Now, it took some teaching to do that. And we didn't line up to go places, okay? And they all had responsibilities. In fact, one of my students, who's now superintendent in Battle Creek, Michigan, came in, and in my early first 3 years, I would never have allowed Charles to say to me, I know all the spelling words. I would probably say, well, that's good, Now go sit down, because we got to get started. I'd have been kind about it, but he said, Mr. Abram, I know all the spelling words in this Lynd's Accompanying handbook. And I said, you do? He said, yeah. He said, my brother had this book. I learned every one of the words. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, Charles, we'll just take some tests, and if you convince me you know all the words, we're going to make an adjustment. So I gave him some tests throughout the book. He never missed a word. Charles ended up teaching spelling for me. He taught spelling. That's real easy because it had an outline in the teacher's edition, what you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Wednesday you had to review tests, and Thursday you studied and did all this, and Charles taught it. Charles ended up being a teacher, ended up being one of the coaches here in the school system, ended up working in Fort Wayne and Marion. He's the superintendent of Marion's Community Schools and now Battle Creek. But he was a student. Students in the last 2 years when I taught could have all kind of choices of what they can do with their time once they had accomplished certain things. So I think that the learning atmosphere has to be flexible enough to allow students to actually practice being a student. In relationship to the other points you mentioned, I think it might vary according to the school and the students you're serving and the families you're serving as to what order you place those in. But the most important one still would be preparation before school. And then holding on to high expectations and setting goals for individual students and families. In special ed, they have to have an individualized plan for each student. And I believe in that for all students. Okay? For all students. And there's some things that students shouldn't have a choice on. That's the part I want to move to before you leave, that I said I'd get to another section. That is, there's some things that students shouldn't have a choice on. And I mentioned one, that's participation in extracurricular activities. They should. Everyone should. Okay. Another is there's certain courses that I think that every student should take. And there's certain skills that every child should have. One of the courses that we've said to each of our children, you have to have a speech. Okay, and you're some of the children are gonna buck their parents. Our son didn't believe that he should have to take speech. He didn't want to take speech, and he didn't do well the first part of it. And then I had to go over, and my wife and I, and meet with Mrs. Payne, the speech teacher, and get things straightened out with him, because it's important that you learn how to present information and how to debate and how to defend yourself verbally, not physically. And, there's some other things that we think are important. I wish that I had an opportunity. That's a foreign language. I wish that I had someone say to me that you are going to take a foreign language. I was capable of learning it when I was back there, but I didn't. And so there are things like that. I could go into more detail, but I think it's important for every family to have the guidance of the people in the school to help develop that list, because it'll vary. Not every child maybe can take all the options that are there, but families should know what should be in those blanks when they feel that part of the plan for their child's life is.
What are some effective ways that you found to teach reading and to teach kids to love reading?
One of the most effective ways is to make sure that they have the skills first to be able to handle what all the skills are that allows them to attack the English language. It may vary according to what the school system has said is the way you're going to do it. There's some school systems say they're going to take a phonetic approach, and there's some school systems say we're going to take another approach or a combination of approaches. But if they don't learn those attack skills early on, if they don't learn how to be able to understand the expectations that people aren't going to tell them all the words, you're going to have to struggle a little bit at first. And then the other thing is just to read. Mr. Emmett Smeltzer, who's the president and publisher for the Muncie Star, has just given us an opportunity. I met with him, and he's going to help us provide a newspaper for every home that's a part of our CAPE structure. So all the children we serve in our after-school program, some of them are not taking the Star Press. They will all get it. One of the things that I think must be important is that the modeling of reading must be there early on. This little guy, he reads at home every day, okay? And he knows which book he wants you to read. If you come there, he'll go get a book and he'll want you to read. He won't let you pick it. He'll get the book he wants you to read to him. And it's one book that he reads over and over again. He has some books that he'll allow his mother to read, but he wants his father to read other books, okay? But the reading modeling has to start early. Once they get there, then the classroom should be structured. When I was a teacher, I kept a book on the corner of my desk, right up here. Anyone who had a certain point could come. If I'm working here, they can just come, pull their chair up, and they can sit up here with me, and they can read from that book. Okay? If I'm not in my chair, they can sit in my chair and read that book. And as long as they're reading, I try to stay away from my desk and allow them to just sit there in the chair. It seemed like a big thing to them.
It's your chair.
I think the whole idea is, can you create an environment that will allow them to enjoy reading or to understand that they must do it. Mm-hmm. And the more you have them in that must-do category, the sooner they'll learn to accept it and enjoy it. Variety is another important thing. If you give me a book about magic, like The Great Houdini was one of my first ones, and you give me something about that, I'd love to read about doing something in magic. Or give me something about airplanes. Okay. I'd love to read about it. So the people have to know what it is that turns on the early young readers. Okay. Right now, this guy likes animals. Okay, he'll outgrow that, but he likes animals. Okay, so they're finding more and more books about animals, and he's learning the names of some animals that he would never know if they didn't keep helping him think that animals are great. And if he'll see an animal on TV, he recognizes, he'll come and tell you. He'll come get you, and he'll come tell you that such and such is on TV. But it's all about knowing that there's certain skills that come with teaching of reading and making sure that the people who do that can, in fact, do it well. When I was a principal, we had what was called remedial reading teachers. And quite frankly, I'm glad we don't have those anymore. That put more of the responsibility on one person rather than saying that all teachers must have these skills. So that's brief. I could go in more detail and more specific about teaching the skills, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Teachers have to know the skills of teaching reading. And they're not going to get it by college alone. You've got to be around some people who are experts at it, and they have to help demonstrate to people how you do it. Miss Morrison, who spent time with me, was excellent at teaching reading. I had not learned how to do it well in student teaching. I had student taught in the 5th grade, and quite frankly, I didn't have enough time as a student teacher. We were on a quarter system, not a semester. And so when I student taught for that quarter, and I had my reading group, and eventually toward the end of my student teaching, I had all 3 groups, it just was not long enough. It was not thorough enough. And Miss Morrison was just wonderful to take that much time with a beginning teacher and help me to understand how to plan first to teach the reading and then how to follow through. And it just, without those 2 weeks of her modeling and a week back with me to watch me teach and help me, without those 3 weeks, I would not have been able to move forward the way I should have.
You said that Mr. McKeever was the first person who talked to you about becoming a teacher. Had you thought about it at all before that?
Well, no, and he was just telling me that I was good, and I didn't really plan to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. See, I went to school in those days, and I was in the Air Force ROTC. Mm-hmm. And my goal was to become a pilot. And so my whole focus, still left from Mr. Diger days, was to know more about airplanes. My father had taken me out to the airport, and I had a chance to go up in the airplane, and I was excited about it. And the Air Force ROTC at Ball State, they had a plane stationed out there at the airport, and you get to go up like a few at a time. About every month, you get your turn to go up, and we fly to Peru, Indiana, and back. And I was totally excited about it. I did well. After the first 2 years, you take what's called an upper division test. I passed the upper division test. Then you go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and you take your physical. I was a very skinny person in those days. In fact, when I graduated from college, I weighed 131 pounds. Okay, and but that wasn't what caused my failure. I passed everything except the eye exam. I did not wear glasses. You had to have 20/20 vision. And so I was majoring at that time in social studies and minoring in business. And so I did not continue in the Air Force ROTC program because I said, if I can't fly, I don't want to go in there. And so that's what's changed my life. Then I decided, well, I'll teach. And I'll teach the social studies because that's my major, and I'll teach business. And I was getting ready for my senior year, and I was dating my wife, and her sister's husband was the third black teacher in the Muncie Community Schools. And we were babysitting their daughter while they went to a movie. He came back, and he's sitting there talking with me, and he said, I understand you're going to teach. He said, now what's your major? And I said, social studies, and my minor's business. And I said, I'm planning to take driver ed so I can teach driver ed. He said, where are you going to teach? And I said, I hope I can get a job here. And he said, you're not going to get a job here. And he said, you need to change your major. They don't hire, colored was the word then. They don't hire colored teachers in high school in Muncie. And so I went back. I changed my major to elementary education. Now I'm in my senior year. I've already done my participation in social studies at Burris. I switched over to elementary ed the summer after my senior year. I took 2 overloads. You can take one without written approval and clearance, so I had to write a petition to take the second overload. I took the second overload, and I took my driver ed training so I could just have that endorsement anyway, and that's how I ended up as a teacher. But I originally did not plan to teach. I only became interested in teaching after I didn't make it number division. Mr. Hyatt, who was a social studies teacher in high school, was a very good teacher, and he taught me to enjoy history, and that's what caused me to have a major in history when I went to Ball State. And really what you're hearing from me is that people influence you. People help you make decisions that are major in your life. And as parents and as people in the lives of young people, we need to help them to be receptive to that. They need to be around people that they can get to know well enough that something sticks besides what they're teaching. So he didn't just teach me history, he taught me the love of history. And so it was more than just being successful in his classroom, it was enjoying it. Because it wasn't you study this and you take a test. He made it exciting. He seemed excited about it. He'd been places. I don't think you can teach history by not having experienced it and not having been to some of those places you're talking about. I would never have gotten interested in flying if Mr. Digert had just told me, well, flying is fun. But the fact that he knew a lot about airplanes, and because we enjoyed it, he let us make some model airplanes in the classroom, and he talked with us about what makes them fly, and he talked with us about how fast they can go and all those things. You probably have some other questions, and I know you all are time schedule, and So.
I was thinking about why I wanted to become a teacher. It was the same, and it's funny, I had a teacher, Mr. White, and he was a social studies teacher, and he was just the same way. I mean, social studies was just social studies when I first got into it, but he made it interesting, and then he was like a professor, and then also that person that I can rely on, you know, if I needed help with anything, he was, you know, there. With even other classes, you know, English.
About is what kinds of relationships will we have in the learning environments? And if we have the right kinds of relationships, then the right kinds of outcomes will be there. And if we don't have, it won't be. I give credit to a number of people who taught me outside the school environment. You've heard of the Bewley Center. Mm-hmm. Mr. Roy C. Bewley hired me as his youth Y director. But he didn't just hire me as a youth Y director. I was beginning college, and he taught me. He was a mentor. He taught me more than about how to run the Y. He taught me about how to work with people. And I think the key other point I'd leave with you is that we have to teach students as we're working with their learning and their training that there's a relationship to success that deals with your ability to relate to people. And if you can't mix and can't work with people, you're going to have some challenges. Mm-hmm. I had a very interesting opportunity. I served for 4 different years as one of the commissions for 2 presidents with the Presidential Scholars Commission. It was our job to pick the most intelligent 110 students in the nation. Okay, the most intelligent students in the nation. I'd go to Educational Testing Service in New Jersey, and we'd pick the students in the spring based on information that had come to us. We didn't get to interview the students. We didn't get to have that personal part of it. And then we would meet the students in June in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that would happen is there'd be several receptions throughout Washington where the students, including one on the White House lawn with the president. But when I looked at those students, we identified that they were brilliant students. I can't tell you some of the fascinating things about some of the students over those 4 years, the things that they were able to do. But there was something lacking. And some of it dealt with this personal relationship, the ability to relate to people. And we were able to develop a recommendation that changed that program from the most intelligent students to include also the gifted, and we call it gifted and talented students. So we were able to pick students who were not just gifted, but also talented. And we found that many of the students who were talented, who were still brilliant students, mm-hmm. also had this social part of them that allowed them to fit in more and all that. So I think that's important for the training, that be a key component. We're not just trying to get students who are brilliant, who can pass the test, who can do all those things well, but they have to relate to other people well and fit in to the total structure of life. So.
Good point. My sister's the brain, but she has no personality. At all.
I bet you.
I mean, with us, but as far as like, she doesn't have, she has maybe 2 friends. And that's just her choice. She stays in the house, she plays on her computer, she watches her TV, she listens to her radio. And that's her life. Her boyfriend and her friend, her best friend, and that's it.
Well, that'll change.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's one more than my sister has. But I'm trying to work on that.
Well, I'll leave you with a hard one then, that as we work with parents, and as each of you perhaps someday become parents, the toughest decision is deciding that you're going to make sure that those things that you've deemed are important will occur at any cost. Okay? That's the toughest decision that adults have to make in the lives of the children. When you know all these things we've talked about, and you believe them to the point that you think that they're important, then you have to make sure they happen at any cost. One of the workshops that I do from time to time, I don't anymore, is working with parents and helping them to know that you must follow through completely with your child. If your child comes home and someone has something that's not right, you pursue that to the nth degree to where you can't go anymore, so you don't lose the support and the respect of your child. And that's another factor that's not what it ought to be in too many cases with families. The child faces something that's difficult and people don't help them through it. Okay? Now the other side of that coin is that students who are really learning, the training is occurring, there have to be goals set that they understand will be met. It's okay to have high expectations, but you have to make sure they're met. We have 3 children. Our last one's a son. Remember like you wouldn't believe. Follow through like you wouldn't believe. He did. And we had to say to him, Mike, you will change. You will. And finally we had to set a deadline. At the end of your middle school experience, if you haven't become the student that you know, that you understand what we're saying, then we'll have to figure out what we're going to do, because you will not stay in the public schools and move into high school and be an athlete and not be a student athlete. And he was not going to be if we hadn't made what I call a major decision to send him away to school. Now that has caused me some grief on my job when I was assistant superintendent. People say, oh, the schools that you work for pay you not good enough for your kid. Well, no, it's not that. It's just that he needs more than they can give him. And the schools can't always give everybody everything they need. So it's important for parents to understand what their children need, and that needs to be encouraged along the way. And then they need to do whatever's necessary. I'm not suggesting in any way they should leave the public schools, but they need to do whatever they should do, they need to do to make sure that that child gets what they should get. Our son ended up in a little town called Rolling Prairie, Indiana, at a school called Lamons Academy. We allowed him to help us find a place to go where he could get the special consideration he needed, where we could build a schedule that would match his needs, and the expectations would be there. It was a live-in situation, 104 young boys, grades 4 through 8, and he was there for a year, and he did so well that he got to come home. But he was an athlete, and he thought more about athletics than he did school. And if we hadn't done that, he would never have been able to go to college on a scholarship as an athlete and stay eligible. He would have flunked out. He had not decided to study and to be a student on his own. He knows that we tell that story. And I only share that to say that it's a living example that at some point the expectation isn't good enough. We have to hold the students to it. We have to do everything we can within the school and within our homes and our community to bring students along so they give their very best. And that's very, very hard. I was subpoenaed into a speech class at the high school, and the charges against me was failure to support public schools. They had a class that they did debating and choose up 2 teams, and I was subpoenaed in to give that. When I finished, being that's supposed to last a day, you're on trial, you go there for an hour, and I had to go 3 days. Okay. At the end of the 3 days, the students were crying because I left them with a charge. Okay, someday you will have a child, some of you, and you will be faced with a responsibility. Are you going to hold to your expectations for this child? Are you going to let them go through something that could deem them to be failures in life? And when I finished, there were the tears and the hugs, and they understood that it wasn't easy for us to do that. I can remember to this day that as I was driving away from that school, and we had a van. My daughter came from the back of the van, and all at once she just started beating on me. And she told me, turn this van around and go back and get my brother. I had to literally pull the van over and stop. because she's bound determined we weren't going to leave him there. And I'm just saying it's difficult. The support has to be there in the home. I can't stress that enough. And as a society, we have to find more ways to support the homes. And that's a difficult charge, because there aren't a whole lot of resources in most communities to address that. But that's where other structures come in, the church in particular. I placed a lot of responsibility on the church, not just for the members of the church, but anybody in that church community. And if every church took that approach, that I'm going to work this community where our church is hard, there are enough churches. There aren't too many communities where there are 0 churches. And I'm not, suggesting any particular faith, but churches in general. Any other questions for me?
How did you get involved with CAPE?
How did I get involved with CAPE? I spent 34 years here it would have been 35, but I left 3 months early to take a job as superintendent of schools in Pontiac, Michigan. And that was a calling for me. I went there because that school system was on a half day. Students at the junior high school, most of us had middle schools in, were getting out after lunch, walking the streets. In high school, you could stay for 6th period, but if you stayed for 6th period, you didn't have a ride home because the bus left at the end of lunch. And if you stayed for the period after lunch, you had to get your own way home, and only electives were offered the last hour. I went there, and the records will show that we did a number of things. They were $3 million in the red when I went there. They had a number of other challenges. I went there and spent 5 years with that district before we left, and the record I won't bore you with, but there's printed materials that talks about the turnaround. And then I came back because I didn't really, 10 years of being a superintendent was enough for me. I didn't want to take another superintendency after that position. I didn't want to stay in that community and do some things. So we had a home here, we had a home there, sold our home there, and we came back here because my brother was critically ill, and my wife's father was not doing well. He was in his 90s, and we ended up needing to place him in a nursing home. So I came back, and I spent 2 years working for myself, doing some consultant work and working for a consultant firm out of South Bend, Indiana, part-time. And this job opening came along, and it was something that matched my background, my skills of working with families that are challenged, and I applied for the job, and was accepted. So it's been a good match. I grew up facing what some of these families face, and can relate to what they're doing, but perhaps more important than that, the Lord's blessed me to pick up some skills to administer programs like this, where we can keep the focus on the goals and objectives that we've set. And that's the achievement for the students and families.
As the director, do you get much direct involvement with the families, or do you have to just organize people all the time?
I get a lot of direct involvement with the families. In fact, our first center opened on the 28th of January of 2002, and the assistant who was with me then and the coordinator from Ball State, the three of us opened that center, and we taught there for 3 weeks to get it started. And if you would have followed me out to the centers, then the involvement of the students and the parents would answer that question for me. And that's what pleases me. If you go into one of the schools and we're walking down the hall, one of the CAPE young people would probably come over if they saw me and give me a hug. Okay, and the parents know who I am and what we're trying to do. Parent caregivers, I should say. Okay? And so, yes, I do get contact with not just them, but I get back into the buildings, because this is a team effort with the regular structured day and the after-school program we have. And I was at Washington Carver this morning, and I'm subject to be any place in our 10 centers. So that the people in the buildings and the parents and the students know who I am. I think that's real important. I was doing what the board here in Muncie said was an excellent job. But they said there's an area that isn't quite as where we think it should be with you. Said that you need to be in the buildings more. And at first I kind of said, well, I've got all this, superintendent of school, got all these responsibilities, how am I going to get, and then I learned to just schedule it. I just say, I'm going to be at this school this day and at this school. And when I went back for my next evaluation, they gave me an excellent in that category. And I felt better about it. I felt better that I thought that swimming was just as important as basketball. So the parents and the swim team knew who I was, and I was at their meets and the girls cross country and all those things. It was a situation where no matter how old you are and how long you've been doing something, if you have good people that you're reporting to, they can cause you to grow. And that's what we're talking about with students. They need to be around good people who are going to be honest about where they are and keep setting those expectations and monitoring things to make sure they happen. When I had my next evaluation with the Muncie Community School Board members, I was able to show them what I'd done, where I'd been, and all that. If they hadn't been honest with me that they didn't think that I was doing that as well as I should, it would not have happened. I would have stayed in the pattern that I had. And that's the way it is with students. Some students don't know why they're not doing better because no one sat down with them. They just know they didn't get a good grade on this and they didn't get a grade on that, and they know that their grade isn't what it should be, but they don't know why it isn't. Now, maybe they should be able to, but it's just helpful to sit down and have a student thoroughly understand that. I won't bore you with some stories, but having worked in schools that long, you run into a number of things that parents have told to them that as educators we learn from it so we can grow and do a better job. Because it's a learning process for everyone in the environment, not just the students, but for staff. We learn how to do things better, how to say things differently.
What do you enjoy most about your job here?
Most about my job here is to know that we're making a difference in the lives of families, okay? That we have an opportunity to be around people that sometimes they haven't had that kind of attention, okay? And I enjoy knowing that they know that we accept them where they are for what they're able to do and that we're a part of what they do and they can help us. You would be pleased at seeing how happy these parents are to come in and be a part of helping us do something. Because we make sure they leave knowing we appreciate it and that they're growing from it. They also know that we're offering something that's helping them. So it's awful nice when you have an opportunity to have a job. One of the things I read just the other day, it says, find a job that you really enjoy and you'll never have to work a day in your life. And that's kind of how I feel. I enjoy my work. I look forward to coming here. Even at a time when the Lord's blessed me that I wouldn't really have to do it. I'm older than people think, and I've worked longer than people think, and I could be like some of my friends. I could be retired, and my wife and I could just not do as much, okay? But I'm not built that way. I've been built and raised to work. So I'm probably going to work doing something forever. I will slow down someday, but that day isn't here. So I enjoy the people I'm around and seeing the results of the team that we work with. We have 10 site coordinators, and I enjoy being around what they do because they're doing so much to help these families and these children. We take students that are the most challenged students in those grades, That goes against all the research. The research says that if you want real learning to occur, if you get more than 50% of the students who are low grade level, have challenges with discipline, are not social when it comes to getting along and knowing what to do, that you're not going to be able to get the achievement in those kind of surroundings. You'll spend most of your time working on discipline, dealing with repeating things and all that. But in our program, we take all the information we can get from their grades, their attendance, the nurse, the counselor, everybody has input, and we line those students up from most needy to the ones who are not as needy. And then we pick from the most needy, and put them in our program. And so when you take students like that and you work with them and you see the changes in their lives, that's what's exciting. And our site coordinators are doing an excellent job of working and teaching and providing experiences. The one thing that maybe we haven't talked about is that life is based on experiences when it comes to learning. One of the reasons I'm able to sit here with you is because I had an aunt. There were 11 children in my father's family. 11. Okay? My father was the oldest. Okay? His youngest sister would take me to Blaine School, and she was in junior high school and I was in elementary school. She's like a big sister to us. When she got married, I had a fit. You know what a fit is. In the old days, they meant that you went crazy. I cried. I did everything because I didn't think she should get married because she was moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Wow. And my then and still is uncle came to me and gave me his sailor's cap that he had when he got out of the Navy. And he said, "Here, you wear this, and you can keep this, and when you come out to see us, bring it out with you, and we'll wear them together." And I spent many of my summers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the foothills of the Sandia Mountains, okay, with my aunt and uncle. They were teaching me about things that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. And they were trusting me with things like, and when I became a teenager and I'd go out and spend 3 weeks or a month and a half with them, they trust me with their family car, which is a new car. And I could drive into Albuquerque and could go to a dance and I had a way, and they just opened my eyes to things. They'd take me down to Juarez, Mexico, and we'd do things that our program is designed to give students experiences. I would never have seen a mountain, let alone been up in a mountain. If I had an aunt that lived there that would take me in. And we're taking our families, we have $6,000, for example, in each budget for field trips. There's not a school system in Indiana that has an individual teacher that has $6,000 for field trips. I don't say that to brag about the money that Lily has allowed us to have, but to say it gives us a chance to do some things with students that they can build their reading base. You can't learn to read if you can't tie the words to things. Okay? You have to have experiences.
You've mentioned how you're built to work, and so work ethic seems really important to you, and responsibility, and your aunt and uncle teaching responsibility. And you also mentioned communicating effectively, verbally, not physically. What are some other lessons that you think that kids should learn, both at home and at school, other than a formal education?
Well, if I were looking at a better understanding of conditions and the world, when I was a student, it wasn't important for me to worry too much about the world. In fact, I had a cousin that had to go to Korea during the Korean conflict, and he used to write back home, and his father would read the letters to us. I'm from an old structure where older people get together and they just talk on a Saturday or something, and they read letters they got from this person so everybody could hear from that person. And I used to listen to some of his letters about how tough it was over there in Korea and how afraid he was at times and how he'd seen people lose their lives. And I said, I'm never going to Korea. Well, but I did. Okay. I ended up in Korea. I ended up spending 11 days in Korea. So now when I see I've been up to the 30th parallel. So when I hear the conflict that's going on in Korea, I can relate to it. I've been blessed to be in other foreign countries, from Japan to some others, so I can relate to it. That's a must for students today. They're going to have to get a global understanding of what's happening. I didn't have to worry about that as a student, but today they must know. They're going to be too close to too many situations not to understand the different cultures. I didn't worry about it. I was not comfortable in Korea. I did not like their food. I did not enjoy their transportation opportunities, their things, but I learned from it. I learned how the universities there in Korea are different from our universities. It was an opportunity. Our students can do that without ever going there now. We didn't have computers when I was there. We couldn't go to the internet. We couldn't do a lot of things. But with the options for learning that we have now, there's no excuse for students not to be global learners. So that's another thing that just needs to occur. It has to. I listen to our granddaughter when we talk about current events. When she stays with us, she watches the news every day. Okay, she's ready for the 5 o'clock time to come, and she'll watch news till 7 o'clock. Okay, and we talk about all these things are happening, and we have discussions about things, and that's something else that must happen with kids. They've got to be aware of what's going on. Our kids are more exposed to horrendous kinds of happenings now, and they need people to help them know how that fits. We've had several tragedies over the last several months that not just terrorists, but things as recent as fires that killed 30-some people last night. Those are the kinds of things that just didn't used to be as much of it. And that has to be dealt with in the homes and also sometimes in the schools. So that's another area I think that's important. We can't do what I used to do. I thought it was something to know the states and the capitals and understand the continents and those kinds of things. But it's deeper than just knowing and repeating things. It's getting in and understanding what's happening in those areas, so they'll understand. My favorite class in my business area was an advertising class that I had that taught me so much about communicating and how you present something when you're trying to sell something. And then my econ classes, I'll never forget, I had Dr. John Hannaford, and everything revolves around that in the country. Everything revolves around supply and demand and all these things. And sometimes they're not real, sometimes they're produced. Our gasoline situation right now, it's not real, not yet, but the effects of it is because the prices are up. And young people have to learn all that. We have students that are in high school that don't understand the value of money. They don't know what money buys and what it should buy. So this whole world condition, understanding of what is happening and what should be happening, and what it means to live in this country compared to another country, and because it's going to be different for them. We think it's different now, but I heard a futurist speak down in Indianapolis last year and talking about what's going to happen in the next 30 years. And most of the time we don't think about what's going to happen in the next 30 years, but when we start thinking about all the conditions are going to change, from people living longer. My wife and I are turning 65, okay? So when you turn 65, we've learned that our insurance changed. We had a lot of other things that changed. And they might as well learn that early, because they're going to live, and if they don't prepare for it, it's going to be more difficult for them than it is for me. There are things that that just shouldn't be a surprise to them. But if we don't teach that, it will be a big surprise when it gets there.
Mm-hmm.
So all those kinds of things need to be in the learning process in the homes and schools, so they can just learn how they're going to live.
Mm-hmm.
Our three children are college graduates, but it's tough for them. Okay, it's tough to get a start. The whole structure out there is different than it was when I came along.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking at me?
Do you have any more questions? Okay, I have one more that I can think of. How do you feel about, I don't know, I guess the well-being of the Muncie community, and that you want all the kids that you work with to succeed and to do well, and if they can go to college, probably to go to college and receive higher education, but a lot of kids that do receive higher education don't come back to Muncie. How do you feel about that?
Ask me that.
What do you think can be done about that?
Well, it's bigger than Muncie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think it's a challenge everywhere, if I can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to get jobs in the factory, and my grandfather coming home from Frank's Foundry, working as an older man. Okay. Those jobs are not there anymore. A lot of jobs are gone. We're into a different high-tech opportunity. And if students aren't going to be flexible enough to fit into that, then it's going to be difficult not just to stay here, but to stay anywhere. And so I think that's the bigger question. Are we going to have places for our students anywhere? When the economy turns like it is, those of us who are been students of history, we can anticipate what's going to happen. History does repeat itself. Not the same degree, not the exact same patterns, but when we get into a situation where things turn slowly, and I'm sitting with a person who's a financial advisor who's been doing it for 32 years here in Muncie, and I didn't know this with Rotary, and he said to me, he said, Sam, we're in the third longest depressed period of time in our history. One more year of this, and we will have matched the time when we had the Depression. I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's quoting one person.
Right.
But when I think about it, things are a lot worse than some people understand it, because most of us are still working, but some people aren't.
Yeah.
Okay? And when things slow down to the degree that they are, and people are getting an education, it's difficult for them to find work in their own city, unless it's different than Muncie, where it's larger and you have a few more options. So I don't think that that's going to change soon. And the way it's going to change is for us to take a look at our whole country and what we're doing and what's important, and how we're providing some opportunities for families that are truly challenged. Otherwise, we're developing citizens who are not as able to fit in as in the past. The more families we have that are not able to go to school because they can't afford it, or some other conditions are true, then we're building a deficit environment, if I may talk in those terms, where it will be more difficult. My advice to young people who find themselves in that situation is to continue to go to school. You can't find the job out there that you want. Find some way through whatever means to be able to, while the economy is slow, it's going to change. It's going to change. The history shows it changes by the government doing something, which might push us into more of a deficit situation, but something comes along that allows more people to be able to work. In the past, it would have been a war, not this time. Okay? I hope we don't go to war. But if we do, it won't produce a lot of new jobs. In the old days, it did. So I think in answer to your question, that's a difficult one. It's not going to go away soon, in my opinion, because communities don't have a way to really jumpstart some new opportunities so there will be jobs. And we're going to find that young people have to be more mobile. They're going to have to be willing to leave their communities and go where they can get a job that might lead them to what they really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Too many young people today are not really starting out doing what they want to do. I started out teaching. There's still some of those opportunities. And I think we'll find more people taking jobs like that they really wasn't their first choice, but it gives them an opportunity to at least have a job, and a job with some benefits.
Mm-hmm. We talked with Harley and Freddie Goodall a couple of nights ago,
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking with them about that same issue. And Harley said that the schools are working on like a Grow Your Own program to try to retain some of the minority students that seem to be really successful, and to try to keep them in the Muncie community. Do you think that might be successful if that all comes through to retain leaders here?
That's certainly a way to do it. When I was superintendent in Pontiac, Michigan, I convinced the board that we were never going to be able to integrate our schools more if we didn't have a program that we actually identified young people in our communities and people who were teaching in our school district who did not have a teaching degree, and we would allow them to go back. And we would subsidize them going back, but they had to come back and teach for us for, depending on how much we subsidize them, for 2-3 years, or else pay us the money back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what happened to part of it. They'd get out and they'd want to come back, and there'd be a school district someplace that wanted them more and would pay what we paid to send them to school.
Oh, man.
So it's not always, it works,
Yeah.
and it should be done. We did get some teachers that we wouldn't have had, but it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
When you invest in your own, then it has to be a broad community-based effort too, because you still need companies to be a part of that, so they can say, well, yes, we're going to find ways to incorporate them and to take a look at how we can use them.
Mm-hmm.
Muncie is not as large as I think we need to have in order to be able to have a lot of opportunities, because the competition's fierce. And there are things that operate that get in the way of that. And I'm not afraid to just say that so often jobs go to not what you know, but who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really take that away completely. So there just sometimes are not enough opportunities. But I firmly believe in Grow Your Own.
Mm-hmm.
And you do the things. There's something else I believe in, that as you're working with families and working with students, they should have the kinds of experiences to where if they can't get a job here and they have a chance to come back, they will. There are people right now in Muncie who couldn't start out working here, but they've been able to come back and get a job. If the things that happened to them had not been positive, they wouldn't want to come back here. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's real important how you treat people while they're wherever they are, so they feel comfortable if there's an opportunity coming back and saying. In the early 70s, I was a recruiter for this school district. I traveled to places like Alabama State and Alcorn, and I got to know the presidents of those universities, and Tuskegee and Jackson State and places like that, looking for minority students to help integrate our schools. And communities have to have something that fits the needs of young people, or else help them to understand, we don't have it, but here it is, and this is how you can get to it. Indianapolis is close. Back in those days, we could say, well, you can get on a plane and you can fly to Chicago. You can spend your weekends in Chicago. We used to have a flight out of the Muncie airport for twice a day to Chicago. We don't have that anymore. So I'm also saying that communities, in order to just hold young people, it's one thing to say we'll have opportunities for them and we want to offer them things. There's another side that we have to be able to have some things that will cause them to say, I want to stay. And so you have to look at this whole side of, if your community doesn't have a lot of what young people want, then show them how they can still have it, and they can have the best of both.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an either or.
It's been a fruitful interview for me.
Is there anything that we've forgotten to ask you about important aspects of education?
No, except to say in closing that it's important that every family understand that it should continue. And you try to figure out how that's going to happen so they understand it early. There are certain graduation test requirements now that makes it a little, different as far as the options that the young people have, but everyone should be thinking about another option. And that's a must to be able to continue to fit in anymore. And, if you think of something later, you can call me and raise that question, but I appreciate the time you all taken with me. And
Thank you.
Thank you for the interview.
Yeah.
so it's, I didn't try to give you all the things that I think are important in that, but because I didn't have an outline that matches your questions, but you've been able to get them in, and so if you think of something else, just It's been pleasant meeting both of you and being with each of you, and so.
Are you better to catch through email or through telephone?
Well, email's fine.
Email.
Email's great. That'd be. I'm better to catch through email. I'm not in here a lot. Okay, one of the things I'm blessed to be a part of is a lot of community activities, and that's a part of what's been exciting for me. Is that my work matches a broader commitment of service. Period, and so. We do a lot of things, and I think that's one of the things that I talk about student involvement. There's some boards that I'm on, and we're looking at how we can involve more students. The mayor and his efforts to involve more students, there's just a number of things like that are different than the old days. I was a so-called good student in junior high school when I was at Wilson, and because of that I was a midtermer. And midtermers mean you come over in January rather than starting in September back in those days. And I had 2 lunch hours. Okay, so during my second lunch hour, I had the opportunity to do a lot of things that were helpful to me, and I think that's a part of what I'm trying to say about students and options and learning and responsibilities. And as we look at all students having opportunities, then we have to figure out how we provide those kinds of things for all students so they have something special going. It's just not a routine day. You come and you just go to class and you go home. And I think it's more important that we start teaching that to families, because I see too many young people that make the decisions in their lives. The parents don't make the decisions, they do. That won't work. I've shared with you some of the things that I made decisions on that weren't good for me, and they didn't hurt me totally because they weren't real bad decisions, but they were bad decisions. And parents need to know what some of those decisions are, and students shouldn't be making some of those. You heard me say, well, I wouldn't allow my child to do some of the things I did with freedom. But that's important, that whatever we do in working with learning and training, that we help those adults in their lives to be able to be in charge. Okay. My father was in charge, and he was a kind-hearted person, but we knew what he expected, okay? And so we did it because we knew we were supposed to. But when children grow up and they don't think there are any consequences for not doing what they're supposed to, it can become a habit, and then it's tough. So. Well, best to each of you as you finish, and I'm looking forward to hearing about what you will find. I don't know if you saw this student, this young person who was a genius on TV last night. Well, he was doing some digs with some people at age 3.
Neat.
Yeah, and
that's fun.
at age 4, he was taking his geometry and algebra.
Oh my
Yikes.
gosh.
So when you told me what you're planning to do, I remember him doing it. We need a lot of teachers, so I'm glad you're going to
Yeah.
do one.
Yes.